Welcome back to another episode of Press Coverage. I'm Andy Anders, joined by Chase Brown, as Ohio State has just landed a commitment from German guard Mathieu Grujicic, a piece that is going to help bolster Ohio State's depth on the wings, in the backcourt. A guy, he stands 6'6", projects to play the three position most likely for Ohio State, but also can help at shooting guard and even some point guard, it sounds like. Chase, what are your first thoughts here as Ohio State has landed an international commitment to help solidify its roster?
Well, first and foremost, I'm wearing my Bayern Munich hat in honor of the German edition. I don't think he would be a Bayern Munich fan. Maybe he is, coming from Berlin. There's a couple of good squads there, but still, the German Giants reign supreme in Germany. But yeah, I think it's a great addition for Ohio State. There was a few options that maybe Ohio State was pursuing that went elsewhere. Darian Williams ended up going to NC State. He was somebody that they were hot in pursuit of, and a few other options that ended up deciding to go play elsewhere. But whenever you can maybe dip into the international talent pool, I think it's worth your while. There's been a couple of international players that have made an impact across college basketball over the past few years. Ohio State is looking to just find impact guys on the wings. And I think that Guguchic provides some depth in that area. I think maybe as we'll talk about later in this podcast, that Devin Royal could be making a switch to the three position and maybe be leading that position. You have Tyson Chapman. You have a few other guards that could be potentially playing that three spot at a high rate. So it's definitely lots to love about the addition. Certainly, though, we'll have to see how his production plays out early in the season next year, and then maybe as it gets into Big Ten play.
It's interesting to me that Jake Diebler has been willing to reach out and get a little creative with these international additions each of his first two seasons. Last year, it was going out and getting Croatian center Ivan Jagovan, who is still on the team, entering his sophomore season. Ivan played some. He was a project, still is a work in progress there a little bit. But I think Grujic comes in with a little more credentials than Ivan did. Obviously, nothing against Ivan. You know I'm a huge Ivan fan.
Right.
But Grujic, this is a guy, played for Barcelona too, which is FC Barcelona's B squad, essentially. FC Barcelona has a basketball team. It might be a little confusing, but since we're talking about soccer already
Right.
here, that is the fourth tier of professional basketball in Spain. However, he did make 3 appearances with their A squad in the highest level of Spanish professional basketball there. Averaged 12.9 points, 4.9 rebounds, and 2 assists in his 21 games with the B squad in that fourth tier league. But for me, it was a lot of what he did beyond his main club. He drops in to Barca's U19 team because he's only 17 years old, about to turn 18 here in July. Drops into Barca's U19 team for one game, and it happens to be the Spanish U19 national championship game. And he scores 20 points and wins championship game MVP. He wasn't even listed on the U19's full-time roster there on Eurobasket, the other outlets that you go and look at for these international players. It just cracks me up a little bit that he was able to come in, didn't play with the team before, and just scores 20 points and wins championship game MVP. Quite an accomplishment there, but also participated in the Adidas Next Generation tournament this past February and May, was the MVP of the qualifiers for that event. He was the MVP of FIBA's Basketball Without Borders camp in Europe. So, very young player, but already some good international accomplishments, and I think more credentials coming in. And when you watch the tape, there's a lot of skill here. Now, he's young. I don't think the plan is for him to be an immediate starter by any stretch, but certainly, as we've said, be a guy off the bench who can give you some good scoring ability, good passing, though he'll need to work on. He had 2 assists versus 3 turnovers per game last season, so that will be something to work on for him a little bit. But I think the number one thing that stands out when you watch him is just the shooting and ball handling skill.
I agree. Yeah. And as you mentioned, I mean, anytime that you can even play on the A-level squad for Barcelona, a squad that featured Dame Sars going to Duke as one of the top prospects in the country, featured Jabari Parker, who went to Duke, was the number 2 overall pick. That's some high-level competition. I mean, so to even get any minutes on a squad like that is certainly notable. Though, as you mentioned, playing at some of the lower levels in Spain, which is, besides the United States, one of the more competitive countries or nations when it comes to professional basketball. Feels like each year the Spaniards are making or contending for one of those top three podium spots in the world competitions and in the Olympics. Yeah, I think what he brings to the table, Andy, is that experience, as you mentioned. And then it will probably just take some time to get used to the conditioning of the American game and in college basketball and the communication aspects, figuring out what defenses are trying to do. The brand of basketball, Spaniards are known for their free-flowing game. It doesn't surprise me that he would be somebody who is a good sharpshooter but might not take care of the ball all that great. It's constant motion, it's constant moving. So we'll see. That's something that Jake Diebler, as you've mentioned many times throughout your tenure covering the team, Andy, that Jake Diebler wants. He wants the guys to go, to shoot it, to play good defense, and to run. And so to have a guy like that comes with the nature of the game already in his DNA, I think is something that will be of value and could contribute to his early playing time and perhaps even his early success at Ohio State.
Kind of rounding out how now the picture looks, I think you mentioned Darian Williams earlier, and that was obviously, I think, Ohio State's top target at the wing. You talk about a 5-star guy, you talk about one of the top 10 guys in the transfer portal. Obviously, would have been a massive land for Ohio State, but them's the break sometimes in the days of NIL, him going to NC State. And you don't want to, I don't always like to call these kinds of commitments a consolation prize. I think he's going to fill a different role than Darian would have filled for Ohio State. Grujicic is. But I think fans have reason to be excited about this edition. And less than a consolation prize, it's just a good piece to bolster the roster and solidify the direction that it's going in as far as Ohio State's starting lineup entering this winter. There's a clear plan now, and that is to start Devin Royal at the small forward position, as you mentioned earlier. Devin's always had the ability to play some wing, to get out there, but there's obviously going to be a lot more perimeter duties. And I think defensively is also where you might have some concerns with him in that 3 position and the matchups he's going to have there. But on the offensive end, it should. Devin showed he can shoot a little more now. That's a little more 3-point shooting game that he added last year. Does some of those things at the wing position to where you think it could really work at the 3 potentially for him. Now you're plugging in Wright State transfer Brandon Noel at the 4, the power forward spot, to pair with Christoph Tilley. How's his game going to translate, right? And then you have Guguchic for depth there on the wing in the backcourt. There's a lot of questions with that lineup, but I think there was a lot of good added from the transfer portal. And Guguchic isn't technically a transfer portal commitment. He's more of an incoming freshman. But the offseason additions for Ohio State to kind of bolster the lineup. But you are going to need some things to click come winter. Josh Ojonwuna, who you got from Baylor, sounds like isn't going to be healthy, certainly at the start of the season. You hope to get him back during the year for more front court reinforcement. But I mean, Chase, as you kind of sit here and think about the state of Ohio State's roster now entering the winter, it looks like they're done adding major contributors. What are your thoughts?
I mean, Ohio State, for the first time in a long time, it feels like to me a few years ago, Chris Holtmann kind of had this idea that while the rest of college basketball was going to go old and build through the transfer portal, that he was going to build with these recruits. Now, you have guys like Bruce Thornton that's entering his 4th year in the program. You have Devin Royal, who will be entering his 3rd year in the program. And those are your 2 top guys. You add somebody in the transfer portal like Brandon Noel, who has experience. You add somebody like Christoph Tilley, who has experience. Josh Ojonwuna, though he didn't get as much of the season because of his injury, he has experience. This is a roster full. And actually, I should mention, too, John Mobley Jr., coming in as a freshman last year, wasn't really expected to play the role that he was going to because of Michi Johnson and kind of his ominous departure from the program about 10 games in. But this is a team that has reps and has the ability to see the game in a different way because of their comfortability on the floor. And I think that experience matters, especially in the college basketball game as it currently is constructed, because teams, for as much talent as they have, if they don't have that experience, you're going to run into a few brick walls, especially now in Big Ten play with the rosters that are shaping up in that league. So I think Ohio State has positioned itself well with experience, but as well as the potential for what this roster could be. I think that Jake's done a good job this offseason at developing sort of a picture for what we could see of this team. And that looks like one that's going to run and gun. That looks like one that's trying to provide some physical interior presence, both on the offensive post and in the defensive post. So there's, I think, a lot to be excited about. I know, again, though, we've kind of had this building excitement for the past few off seasons for Ohio State basketball. So I'm sure fans will want to see what those reps look like in January and February before they make any conclusions about the team.
Right. And with that experience too, though, I think it's important that you are counting on some guys from smaller time, less competitive programs to translate their games to the Big Ten, whether that's Noel from Wright State, Christoph Tilley from Santa Clara, you're now relying on to be your starting center. But that experience is very valuable. You're right, Chase. And I like the run and gun description when you look at a lot of the pieces that have been added and the versatility of their offensive games. Noel was a really good three-level scorer at Wright State, has a very diverse offensive skill set in that way. And then you have Christoph Tilley, who was very efficient around the rim at Santa Clara and a very big part of their offense. If he's a guy that can give you double figures consistently, now you're starting to look at a lot of that front court scoring production that they frankly missed last year. And I think that could be something that boosts the team as they have some guards that obviously have experience, have proven they can do it. Hopefully, John Mobley Jr. takes another step. Obviously, Bruce Thornton going to be a star again. Tyson Chapman coming back from his injury entering this year, and it seems like they expect him to make some contributions too. Then you have Gabe Cupps from Indiana, a little more some experience, but has had his own injury concerns, and you hope that he can pop a little bit. Former Ohio Mr. Basketball, so I think there's a lot to be optimistic about with this Ohio State roster. It just all needs to click. And I think particularly before they get Josh Ojawuna back, who's an excellent defender, if and when I should say, this season, because there's a possibility that he redshirts and then, depending on where he is in his injury progression, how they're going to handle the physicality of Big Ten front courts. That's less of a question that pertains to Mathieu Grujicic, but for now, really good German guard to add for Ohio State. Jake Diebler gets creative with an international addition and pretty much solidifies this is the group of contributors that Ohio State is going to have entering the 2025 to 26 season. That's going to do it for us on this episode of Press Coverage. I'm Andy Anders. He's Chase Brown. Thank you all for joining.